What's up guys, Lisa here, and today we're going to talk about how to create those fine detail lines with royal icing and how to prevent the icing from curling as it comes out of the piping bag. First thing you want to do is check your piping bags and make sure that they don't have this big flappy seam on them. So picking your piping bag is the first step in being successful with having clean lines. You want to look for a bag that has a flush, clean seam. This one's a little bit of a bigger, a little bit more of a messier seam. We actually carry these bags that we design a little bit thicker, and they have this very tight, clean seam. So look for that first when you're choosing what types of piping bags to use for your detail work. It doesn't matter as much if you're flooding when it comes to seams on your bags because you're filling in a big surface, but when it comes to working with details, pick a bag that has a small seam and just use those for details if you want to save some money and use the cheaper bags from Amazon for your flood. We actually sell these bags on our website, borderlandsbakery.com. They have a really clean, tight seam. Of course, we will have bad batches like any other product on earth, but for the most part, they're really good, and they are a slightly thicker bag than your average tipless piping bag, making it harder to pop if you're heavy-handed. Now, one of the questions that I get the most often is how do we prevent the icing from curling as it exits out of the bag? There isn't like one simple solution that will fix all of this. It's a combination of factors. I'm gonna go over some of the things that you can be aware of so we can reduce the problem. The first thing you have to get right is your icing consistency. So depending on how thick or thin you want your lines to be, the consistency might need to change a little bit. For the most part, when I'm piping really thin, detailed lines, I'm using a consistency that's thicker than a flood and looser than a toothpaste. So it's about a intermediate, I would say 25-second, 30-second icing that does not settle well on its own, but still will not hold its shape properly if we were to just pipe a dollop onto our surface. I call this a very loose toothpaste consistency. If you check out my writing with icing class, I show you the consistency I use, and that's the same consistency I'm going to be working with today. After picking out your tipless piping bag and getting your consistency right, you want to make sure you trim your bag correctly. When I'm trimming my bag, I have my seam oriented down the center, and I pinch my bag so that it's completely flat. And I take a pair of very sharp scissors. I love to use embroidery scissors to trim my piping bags because they're super sharp. And I make a cut right across, straight across. And you can start small. This is about less than a millimeter as far as the width goes. You can always go bigger, but start small and then increase the size if you feel like you need to. Holding your piping bag can also make a big difference in your level of comfort, but also how much control you have over your icing. One of the things I tell people, especially when they're doing detailed piping, is to not overfill your bag. So I have a bag here, and it's very small. It fits in my hand really comfortably. I would never do detailed piping with a large bag because I have to hold it all the way up here, and I will have much less control over a smaller amount of icing. When you're ready to pipe, I see people hold their piping bags in a couple of different ways. My preferred method is to hold it with most of the product in your hand like this, as if you're going to stab something. I used to say someone, but I have modified my ways and I don't say someone anymore. Stabs. Holding it this way allows me to apply a very intentional amount of pressure to the product in the piping bag. When you pipe lines, it's the perfect marriage of applying enough pressure and moving your hand or arm in a certain speed. So think about that, right? So you're applying pressure and you're moving at the same time, letting the icing fall behind you as you make those lines. One of the reasons your icing comes out curled is probably because you're squeezing too hard for the speed that you're moving. So if we look down at our surface and I'm just squeezing but I'm not moving, my icing is gonna come out curled. But if I squeeze, touch down, let the tip of my icing adhere something and barely apply pressure, and now I'm evenly applying pressure, pulling and dragging and dropping, letting the icing fall behind me, releasing pressure, tapping down, and having that line stop right there. Same piping bag, same icing consistency, same human, different technique. So you want to apply that for any kind of detail piping you do. You want to apply a tiniest bit of pressure, allowing a little bit of the icing to come out of the bag so that it can adhere to the surface. Now apply more even pressure and move at the same time. The moment you squeeze more than the speed of your movement is when your icing will start to curl. And that's why we see that curling behavior. The other thing that can happen is your icing might be too runny, or the hole is too small for the consistency of icing that you've got going on. Right now I have the perfect marriage of hole size as well as icing consistency, giving me the ability to create these clean lines so long as I also pipe with the correct technique, ensuring that there's a proper amount of pressure and even movement to match that pressure as my icing comes out of the piping bag. By allowing some of the icing to come out first and adhere and then moving also prevents these big bulbs of icing where we just put our piping bag down, pipe a little bit, and then drag and drop. This is the putting your piping bag down and then dragging and drop, instead of letting the icing come out and then smoothly, immediately dragging and dropping. So that's how you create these clean lines. Now let's look at an example where I've cut my hole way too small. So in comparison, if I pinch and squeeze so you guys can kind of see the difference in the hole size, this is almost half the size of this hole. And the consistency is a tad looser. I can still get very detailed lines. So the smaller the hole, the smaller the lines, the looser your consistency has to be. And notice as I'm piping, I'm keeping distance between my piping bag and the surface, allowing the icing to fall behind me. So I'm squeezing just a little bit, tapping down, allowing the icing to adhere, and then pulling it. You see the icing is pliable and it falls behind me. I release pressure, tap down to release. The only differences between them is this has a looser consistency and the hole is a lot smaller. This is a thicker consistency and the hole is bigger. You can achieve details with all kinds of consistencies and all different hole sizes, but the most important thing is your technique and getting your tip very clean. Make sure you pinch it off to clean your tip. Don't do this, it's gonna mess with your tip. And that's it. Those are the things that I personally look for when it comes to creating detail lines and to prevent curling when your icing exits your piping bag. Don't get discouraged if you're not getting it straight out the gate. This takes so much practice. A lot of us have been doing it for years and we still have to consciously think about getting the right consistency, cutting our hole to the right size for that consistency, and actually practicing the lines or the detail work that we're going to do, maybe even on a piece of paper before we move on to the actual cookie itself. If you liked this video and found it helpful, please give us a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you want to see more cookie decorating and baking and even food content in the future. See you in the next video.